Good afternoon. I am Kate Pritchard, part of the NIH Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare. Today is Thursday, September 8th, 2022, and I'm pleased to welcome you and our speakers to our webinar today, titled FDA's New Guidance on Compounding Bulk Drug Substances. All right, let's get started with introductions for our speakers. Dorothy Bailey, DVM, is a veterinary medical officer in the Office of Minor Use and Minor Species Animal Drug Development at the U.S. FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine. She's been with the FDA for 16 years and is the head of the indexing program. Dr. Bailey graduated from the Virginia Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine in 2003. Amber McCoy, DVM, MPH, is a senior veterinary medical officer, science policy, in the Office of the Director at the U.S. FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine. She's been with the FDA for 14 years, including serving as the Deputy Director for CVM's Division of Compliance. She's a 2005 graduate of the University of Missouri College of Veterinary Medicine, and she's also an adjunct professor in the University of Missouri Department of Public Health and teaches veterinary public health policy. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Nicolette Petervary, VMD, MS, representing OLA today. Dr. Petervary is the Director of the Division of Policy and Education here at OLA. She received her veterinary degree from the University of Pennsylvania, her master's in comparative biomedical sciences from North Carolina State University, and is a diplomate of the American College of Animal Welfare. Her past experiences include private clinical practice in small and exotic animal medicine, research, and regulatory veterinary medicine. And with that, I'll hand the presentation over to Dorothy.
Thank you to Kate for the introduction. And I was also thanking OLA for inviting Amber and I to come to speak with you all today. And as Kate said, we are going to discuss the FDA guidance on compounding from bulk drug substance for office stock, or guidance for industry number 256. Here we go. First, I'm just going to give you an overview of the presentation. The first part, we're going to cover the 3 legal marketing statuses for animal drugs and some information on pharmaceutical grade substances. And then the second part, Amber is going to present some information related to drug compounding and GFI 256. So the topics that I'm going to present specifically, I'm going to cover the 3 legal marketing statuses for animal drugs, which are approval, conditional approval, and indexing. I'm going to tell you ways to identify these drug products, and then I'm actually going to hand it over to Nicolette, and she's going to present a few slides on pharmaceutical grade substances. A few definitions that will be helpful to you all during this presentation are here. First, the FDA considers major species to be horses, dogs, cats, cattle, pigs, chickens, and turkeys. And then essentially everything else is considered minor except for humans. And then a minor use are drugs intended for use in a major species for a disease that occurs infrequently or in limited geographic areas and only a small number of animals annually. And then one very important note is when I'm discussing the legal marketing statuses for animal drugs, and our regulation of their use, I'm talking about when you use these drugs for the clinical care of animals, so not when the drug is the subject of the research. Now, what is the difference between FDA approved, conditionally approved, and indexed drugs? FDA approved drugs have had adequate and well-controlled studies conducted to demonstrate a substantial evidence that the drug is safe and effective for its intended use. Environmental safety, user safety, and human food safety, if the drug is for use in a food-producing animal, have also been addressed. And manufacturing studies have been conducted to ensure the strength and purity of the drug. All of the data is reviewed by FDA scientists, and once the drug is approved, it is manufactured in accordance with current good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, and this is to ensure quality and consistency of the drug product. Extra label use is legal for approved drugs under certain circumstances. And on this slide, we've provided you with a link at the bottom that will take you to an FDA web page that will explain extra label use for veterinarians. And the bullets here represent some of the information that is included on that web page. So ways to recognize an approved drug. The label may have, and I do mean may, some of the older approvals may not have this information on the drug, but they may have a 6-digit application number, and this can either be a new animal drug application or NADA number, or for generic drugs, it would be an abbreviated new animal drug application number or an ANADA number. The label may also include a statement that says approved by FDA, and I've included a couple of examples here that'll show you how this information might be represented on labeling. If you do not see any of either the application numbers or a statement that says approved by FDA on the labeling, we do have a searchable database of all approved drugs on our the FDA website. It's called Animal Drugs for FDA. So you could go there to search for the drug, and we've included a link on this slide. So now we're going to move on to conditional approvals. For a conditional approval, all approval requirements have been met except for effectiveness. But the FDA has determined that there is a reasonable expectation that the drug will be effective. Once it's conditionally approved, the drug can be marketed for up to 5 years while the drug sponsor completes the effectiveness technical section. And once that section is complete, then the drug would be considered fully approved. Conditional approval it's an incentive for minor uses in major species or for drugs for use in minor species. And we've also, the FDA has recently expanded conditional approval to also include drugs that treat a serious or life-threatening condition or drugs that meet an unmet animal or human health need. But in addition to those two things, demonstrating effectiveness also needs to require complex studies, complex or difficult studies to qualify. And then for conditionally approved drugs, extra label use is prohibited for these products. The labeling for a conditionally approved drug will include a 6-digit application number, and it will also include language stating that it's pending full approval by the FDA. And we provided an example here, and this is what it should look like if you see it on the labeling. All right. So now we're going to move over to indexing. Indexing is an alternative to the approval process, and it provides a legal marketing status. So the drug is considered unapproved, but legally marketed. The target animal safety and effectiveness for an index drug is determined by a risk-benefit analysis that is conducted by an outside expert panel. This expert panel does have to be accepted by the FDA to do this review. And the FDA does look at and review the report from the expert panel of their risk-benefit analysis. We also review a summary of the manufacturing process. So we do not see study data related to manufacturing like you would for an approval, but we do review a summary of the process. And then we also look at information to address user and environmental safety. Before we put the drug on the index, the drug holder, which is the manufacturer of the product, does sign a commitment to manufacture the product in accordance with good manufacturing practices. Indexing is available only for drugs for use in non-food minor species. The legal standard is actually that we have to have a reasonable certainty that the animal will not be consumed by humans or food-producing animals after receiving the index product. And lastly, extra label use is prohibited for index drugs. The labeling for an index product will include a 6-digit minor species index file or a MIF number. This number always starts with a 9. And then it also is going to include certain statements that are required for index drugs regarding legal marketing status. And I've actually provided you 2 examples here because sometimes those statements regarding legal marketing status can look different depending on the size of the label. The full statement is the example at the top of the slide that starts with legal status. And then that example up underneath that, you can see where if it's a small label, like a vial label, where we cannot fit the entire statement, then we will allow them just to put a legally marketed with the MIF number and the extra label use prohibition statement. We also have the list of the index drugs on our website, and it includes all the drugs that are indexed. And there's also links to the Freedom of Information summary and the labeling for these products. So we've talked about the difference between the different legal marketing statuses, but are there any similarities? Yes, there are. All of these drugs go through a pre-market process that includes FDA review of information related to safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing. And all are monitored once they're marketed. For approved drugs, that monitoring includes inspection of the manufacturing facilities. They submit annual reports related to the quantity that is marketed each year. And then FDA also reviews promotion and advertising materials. For conditional approval, there's an annual renewal process where each year they have to tell the FDA what progress they have made toward completing their effectiveness technical section. And once they do complete that effectiveness technical section, the product becomes fully approved, and then it's marketed or monitored just like any other approved drug would be. For index drugs, the manufacturing facilities for index drugs are eligible for inspection by the FDA. They do submit annual reports to us that includes information related to the quantity marketed, and then any minor changes to the labeling or to the manufacturing process. And then we also do review promotion and advertising materials for those products as well. And then very important similarity between all these products is that you, the end users, can report adverse drug events for any of these products. And we've provided a link to a web page that will tell you how to do that. And now I'm actually going to let Nicolette take over and discuss pharmaceutical grade substances.
Thanks, Dorothy. So as you've heard from Dr. Bailey, you've heard the term approved, conditionally approved, and indexed drugs. You have not heard the term pharmaceutical grade. So my job here is to explain what pharmaceutical grade is. And firstly, it's not an FDA term. It is a term that we use describing any active or inactive drug or biologic or similar manufactured under good manufacturing practices. And it can include approved, conditionally approved, and indexed drugs. And why is this? It's because all of these drugs go through an FDA process that involves review of information relating to safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing. So this is the reason these are considered under the umbrella of pharmaceutical grade, but this is not an FDA term. Another thing that is important to remember is that even when using what we consider to be pharmaceutical grade substances, you are to adhere to FDA requirements where applicable. And there should always be attention to appropriate reconstitution, labeling, compounding, use, and storage. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. McCoy to talk about the second portion of the FDA presentation.
All right. Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you, and I'm going to continue on with the presentation and dive a little bit deeper into our guidance for industry 256. This came out in April and discussed compounding animal drugs from bulk drug substances. So today I'm going to talk about the difference, just kind of go over again, approved versus unapproved, talk about compounding under the Animal Drug Use Clarification Act, and discuss compounding from bulk drug substances. Oops. So here's just a quick overview. And again, there's a difference between approved, marketed, and so for us, an FDA approved drug is going to be, something that has gone through pre-market review as well as post-market oversight. So we have things that we monitor after the drug is in the marketplace, such as like their manufacturing, their labeling, and things like that. And I know that Dr. Bailey already went over the conditionally approved and then also the index. So I don't need to bother you guys with covering that again. So for us, these new animal drug approvals, they show that we've had data that demonstrates that they're safe, effective, that they have manufacturing quality and adequate labeling. And again, FDA monitors adverse events as well as product defects, advertising, and changes in manufacturing and labeling. So these are things that you do not see in compounded products or in unapproved drugs. And we recognize that veterinarians do need the ability to compound animal drugs. We know that this is a challenge that we face daily. Before 1994, as many of you know, we did not have the ability to do that. And Congress passed the Animal Medicinal Drug Use Clarification Act at that time, and this allowed veterinarians with a valid veterinarian client-patient relationship to legally prescribe approved human or animal drugs for extra label use. And this included compounding from approved products. And when you are compounding an animal drug, that's anything that involves the process of combining, mixing, or altering an ingredient to create a medication that is tailored for the needs of an individual animal or a small group of animals. So I want to just stress the individual or small group of animals. I think for this audience, that's probably an important point to make sure to point out. Animal drug compounding falls into two different categories. We have the approved drug compounding, which, as I said earlier, is legal extra label use under AMDUCA. And then we have compounding from bulk drug substances. So this creates an unapproved new animal drug under the Federal Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. And so that means that when you are compounding and not using the approved product, that is technically an illegal product. And I think that some of the common misconceptions that that we have are that compounded drugs are generic drugs, or compounded drugs have somehow been evaluated by FDA, and they have not. The bulk drug substance has not been reviewed as part of an application. So unless they are using an approved drug and then mixing that and coming up with a new product with the base being the approved product, then they're making an unapproved new animal drug, and that is with the bulk drug substances. So it is possible you could have two different bottles of medication that have the same active ingredient, and they're going to appear very similar. And sometimes it's difficult to even recognize that you have a compounded product. And I think, as Dr. Bailey went through, there are some key things that you can look on the label to see if it's an FDA approved product. But some of the other differences to note are just that compounded drugs do not have the pre-approval evaluation. So they have unproven safety. We don't know about their bioavailability. And we also don't know about their effectiveness, quality, or stability. And stability is going to be very important when we're talking about office stock or things that are kept on a shelf. They also, again, don't have the regulatory requirements to have that post monitoring that we have with approved drugs, and that's going to include adverse events and product defects. So FDA and the public may never be aware when these things come up. And we do have safety concerns with animal drug compounding. We are specifically concerned with drugs that could present human or animal safety issues. So that could include the human handling of the drug itself. We also are, for the same reason, concerned about compounding for food producing animals, because that could then cause a residue that could get into the food supply. We're concerned about copies of approved, conditionally approved, and indexed or marketed drugs, because we think it's important to protect our approval process. And we also, as I said earlier, have some increased concerns about office stocks. And I'm in office stock, and I'll go into that now. So drugs that present a particular animal safety concern would be drugs that contain more or less of the labeled amount of an active ingredient, or drugs that have a bacterial contamination or fungal contamination. We have seen some examples of this happening in the past. In 2009, compounded vitamin and mineral injectable solution had about 100 times the intended selenium, and that led to the death of 21 polo ponies. In 2014, we had compounded totrazeril and pyrimethamine oral suspension that had over 20 times the labeled pyrimethamine, and this led to 2 horses dying and the illness of 6 others. And in 2019, the same product, compounded totrazeril and pyrimethamine in an oral paste, contained 18 to 21 times the labeled pyrimethamine, and this crossed over into 2 states as well, and 3 horses died. And it's also important to point out again that these are only the ones that we hear about. A lot of these things, we learn about them when they're in the news, because they are not required to report these adverse events to us. FDA may not be aware. And that also means that we wouldn't be able to take action to help mitigate anything that's happening. Additionally, we have had over 40 voluntary recalls of compounded animal drugs since 2016. All of these recalls were in response to public health concerns. So that included lack of sterility, microbial contamination, failed stability, manufacturing issues, and insanitary conditions. So drugs that are copies are a concern, as I mentioned, because they would compete with approved products. And this could undermine the incentives for firms to investigate and get new drugs approved or indexed for animals. And as you all have probably experienced, it's already difficult to get approved products for many minor species. So we feel that compounding could really have an impact on whether or not people are putting the resources into doing that. And finally, we are especially concerned with the potential risk of harm from off of stock. And so these products that are kept on a veterinarian shelf, they're going to be in larger quantities. So they can be widely distributed to different veterinary hospitals or different patients. That means they could endanger a larger number of animals if they've been compounded improperly or under unsanitary conditions. And also, we don't know the stability of these products. So they may be ineffective after they sit on the shelf for too long. So all that being said, we know that there's a legitimate veterinary medical need for compounding from bulk drug substances, and we want to preserve that ability. So in this guidance, that's really what we aimed to do, was to help veterinarians when they need access to compound animal drugs. So we recognize that veterinarians need this access, and we know that there are specific patients that require it. So we want to just protect animals and humans from any safety issues that we can, and we want to preserve the integrity of the approval process, and that is what we put forward in this policy. The guidance describes our approach to these situations and outlines how we intend to exercise enforcement discretion or provide flexibilities for pharmacists and veterinarians who compound animal drugs from bulk drug substances. The policy addresses 3 different categories, and that includes individual patient-specific prescriptions, office stock for non-food producing species, and antidotes for food-producing animals or sedatives for free-ranging wildlife. It's really important that these different categories are recognized, because there has been some confusion about different things that apply to specific categories. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that the patient-specific prescriptions, which could be, again, an individual patient or a group of animals, do not have a bulk drug substance list. And we're going to kind of go into more details on what that means in a minute. So we did not simply finalize our draft guidance. And if you had an opportunity to review the draft guidance that came out in 2019, we developed and implemented a rigorous process. We had over 2,200 comments that we reviewed. And based on all the feedback that we received from veterinarians, people from the industry and the public, we substantially modified things and made those changes. In the final guidance, we continue our policy that veterinarians are not limited to any list if they're compounding for a specific patient or a group. We also do not intend to generally take enforcement action if they are compounding a copy but have a medical rationale to have the copy and cannot use the approved drug for that patient or group. We also have simplified our definition of a copy. So our definition of a copy is now something that has the same active ingredient and is given by the same route of administration. And that may seem like a broad group, but that is going to help people to not have to determine whether or not what they're making is a copy. We want it to be simple so people know when a medical rationale is needed. And I'll go into more details in a minute, but a medical rationale is only needed if you're making a copy of an approved product. If you're doing a patient-specific prescription that's not a copy, we do not ask for any type of medical rationale. And lastly, we also have asked in this guidance that compounders report ADEs to the FDA. So one of the things that we did, we streamlined our process for nominations of office stock, and we also included in our food producing animal category, we included free ranging wildlife. So I'm going to go into more details on all of these things. We'll start with the nominations to the bulk drug substance lists. So we have 3 different lists that you can use for office stock or for food animals. Office stock is for non-food animals, and food producing animals, the list that's for food animals, which includes wildlife, that list can be for office stock or for patient-specific prescriptions. So it's required because you cannot compound products for food-producing animals. So we have to have a list to identify those bulk drug substances that can be used in any situation that they're needed in. So some of the things that are consistent on all 3 of those lists is that they can't be a copy of an approved product. Also, they can't have the same active ingredient as something that could be used in an extra label manner. So that's consistent with AMDUCA. And we can't have any safety concerns about that particular bulk drug substance. So we take nominations to all of these lists. We have a docket that is available and the nominations can be submitted there. And we intend to include bulk drug substances on our office stock list if it's needed urgently to avoid animal suffering or death. So that could just be that for some reason, the animal needs to be treated and there is not time to wait for a prescription to be filled. So some of the additional circumstances that we have for food producing animals and free ranging wildlife is that it's an antidote for food animals or a sedative or anesthetic for free ranging wildlife, and that some scientific information is available to provide a withdrawal, withholding or discard time, or a means to ensure that the animal does not enter the food supply. And like I said, we have a docket and we accept nominations. Those nominations could come from veterinarians who need to use a product, also from pharmacists. And we ask that people use the docket so others can also participate, and the onus is just not on one person to get all the information. We want this to be an open process where people can see what has been nominated, also so they don't have to duplicate efforts. And when we are looking at nominations, we really look at how the product is going to be used. So we need to know the chemical name, the common name, and then a description, because we have many different products for humans and animals. So we need to know the dosage form and the strength and concentration. Species to be treated, and for the dosage form, that could also be a range, because we recognize that this may be for different species or different sizes of animals. Same thing with species to be treated. There can be more than one species included on a nomination. The disease or condition to be treated is asked for to aid us in our review of materials. It's hard for us to determine if there is a safety issue if we don't have the ability to look into why it's being used, and specifically what species it's being used in. And then also why it's needed for urgent treatment. So again, the other why that we're talking about. If there is no FDA approved drug to treat the disease condition, we just ask that you provide a statement that says there's not an approved drug that can meet this need. If there is an approved drug and it has the same active ingredient, we just need a couple of lines of why that approved drug cannot be used. And all of this information, we only ask that you provide it if you know it. We recognize that sometimes the people who are prescribing may not have all the information. They may not know that it's a tablet that has a specific coding. And that's why we have a process where we can get back to you and ask questions. And we also have things in the docket so that pharmacies and others can also participate in adding to the docket and helping us to make those decisions. All right. And then also, again, if known, the nomination should include if there are any human or animal safety concerns, and if the drug's going to be used as an antidote for a food-producing animal or sedative or anesthetic for free-ranging wildlife. We're asking if there's scientific evidence for a withdrawal time or any other information that can be provided. And I think I've said this several times, the nominations are submitted to our docket. And one of the things that we changed from the draft to the final is we wanted to provide a way to have, two-way lines of communication. We want to help people nominate things to our lists. So we're available, and we have a compounding mailbox to assist if for some reason you're having trouble with the docket or understanding what information is needed. So please feel free to use that mailbox. We're also going to use that so that we can reach back out if we have other questions. We don't want people to feel like they're submitting a nomination and then it goes into a black hole and we don't hear about it again. And I think that is another important point. If something is nominated and it goes into the docket, we do a brief look to just see if there are any major safety issues that we're aware of. And barring that, that nomination is immediately put on our list of drug substances that are currently under review. So just to make things very easy, we have like 5 different lists for you to review. But when it goes on this list of bulk drug substances that are currently under review, that means that they can be used during that time while they are on the list. And we're going to provide enforcement discretion at that time. And we thought that this was important so that when the guidance came out, that didn't mean that we were immediately pulling things while we were reviewing nominations. We don't have the ability to give a specific timeline for how long nominations will take. And we understand that that could be stressful for people who are needing these drugs in order to treat their patients. So we are providing discretion during this time. And it's going to remain on the list throughout the review of the nomination. After the review is complete, it will go on either the bulk drug substance that are reviewed and not listed, the non-food producing animal, which we talked about is office stock, or the food producing animal list, which is for antidotes for food producing animals and sedatives and anesthetics for free ranging wildlife. So if it is on the bulk drug substance to be reviewed and not listed, we are still open to re-review the bulk drug substance at any time if new information has come up. And I just want to remind you again that these lists only apply when you are talking about for non-food species, things that are on the shelves at veterinary offices, office stock that's made in large batches, or those products that are made for food producing animals and free ranging wildlife. This does not apply in any way to patient specific prescriptions for either individual patients or groups of animals that are being treated. And you can find more information. We do have a website on nominations, and it gives information about how to submit a nomination and more details about what we're asking for. And another important thing to discuss is kind of how we plan to roll this out to everyone. As I said, it came out in April. And since that time, we have really emphasized stakeholder engagement. We have been looking for ways to get out there and speak to different people. We want veterinarians to understand what this means for them, as well as pharmacies. I think another thing that's important to understand is that when we are looking to do inspections, and when we're looking if people are following the circumstances and the guidance, that means that we would be doing inspections at pharmacies. We do not intend to inspect veterinary offices to see if they are following this guidance, unless the veterinary offices are the compounders themselves. This is really just aimed at the compounding and not veterinarians that prescribe compounded products. So we are looking to shift to those inspections later in fiscal year 23. And during this time, we want to speak with people and help for there to be an understanding of really what the guidance means for everyone. So some of the key points I want to make sure I've been able to convey are that we really believe that veterinarians need this flexibility to compound from bulk drug substances. We know that there are not enough FDA approved options available. And I think something that I might have skipped over that I probably should go back on too is that another thing that impacts probably this group more is that in the guidance, we did clarify that indexed and conditionally approved products can be used to compound instead of bulk drug substances. We see there as being like a hierarchy for compounding. So our preference is that people use an approved product when it's available, because we know that there's known safety and efficacy. After that, if people need to turn to an index product or a conditionally approved product, this is one time when there is an exemption in that the extra label use not being allowed in those products. So you can compound from index or conditionally approved products. We would like for the last resort to be bulk drug substances because we have the least amount of information about them. And prescribing drugs to be compounded from bulk drug substances for specific non-food producing patients or groups of non-food producing patients is not limited to a bulk drug list. So those lists only apply to office stock or compounding for food animals. And also medical rationales are only required in prescriptions if you're doing a copy of the product. And a medical rationale could be something as simple as, would need too many pills. And we do not intend to go back and to question the professional judgment of why this is needed. We just need to make sure that there has been a thought process and that there's a reason why a copy is being made. And our nominations remain open, and that's also a rolling process. So all of those lists are open. As we get things in, we're putting them on the currently under review list. We are giving enforcement discretion for things that are on the currently under review list. And as we review them, we're hopefully getting them onto the right non-food or food producing list so that veterinarians can have access to them. And I think that I skipped through a little bit faster than normal, so I'm happy to answer any questions. And I can turn that back over.
Yes, as Nicolette starts sharing, we did receive a lot of questions in advance of the webinar, so we're going to be answering these first, and then there are some really good questions also coming in through the Q&A box. And so as we have time, we'll be getting to those too. So Nicolette, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Terrific, thank you. So we did get some questions in advance of this webinar. And question number one is, can mouse buprenorphine be used in other related rodents such as wild mice, voles, or other non-mus species? If the insert says for use in mice only or rats only, and it is used in another species, is this off-label use or is it illegal?
I will take that question. So I'm assuming when the mouse buprenorphine is in relation to the indexed product. And so it is true that extra label use of indexed drugs is prohibited. That being said, if it says rats and mice on the label of an indexed product, then any rat, any mouse would be acceptable. And there is also an approved feline buprenorphine product that has a 24-hour effectiveness. It's once a day, and that could be used legally. You know, if you follow the extra label use regulations, that could be legally a legal extra label use of that product.
Thank you. So we'll go on to this next question, and there's a little bit to unpack here. If two pharmaceutical grade drugs are mixed by a licensed veterinary compounding pharmacy, are they still considered pharmaceutical grade? What if this is done by a university or hospital pharmacy? And how about by the vet or the PI? And to reiterate, for the purposes of this session, we consider a pharmaceutical grade substance to be any active or inactive drug, biologic, or reagent manufactured under good manufacturing practices, which is approved, conditionally approved, or indexed by the FDA. So when you're mixing two pharmaceutical grade drugs, all components still meet this definition of pharmaceutical grade. But the real question really isn't the status of whether it's pharmaceutical grade or not. The question is this legal extra label use under the FDA? Because as we've mentioned before, OLA's expectation is that institutions follow FDA guidance where applicable. So as Dr. Bailey mentioned, for two approved drugs, it is legal extra label use under the supervision of a licensed veterinarian or pharmacist. But remember that there are different requirements for indexed and conditionally approved drugs because extra label use is prohibited. And I will pass this on now to our FDA speakers to see if they have any additional comments.
Well, I think I would just add, extra label use is generally prohibited for those products, but for the purposes of compounding, we do allow discretion that they can be used again, if that can be instead of a bulk drug substance. So this is one time when extra label use of an index product is not going to be a concern for FDA.
Thank you. And one other point to once again reiterate is that the FDA requirements apply to clinical care. If the drug that is in question is a test article or the subject of the research, these requirements do not apply, these FDA requirements. So just wanted to reiterate that before we go on to question number 3. And this is kind of a variation on the previous question. Is a cocktail such as ketamine, atropine, rompin, all veterinary pharmaceutical grade, still pharmaceutical grade when combined? If one component is not pharmaceutical grade, would the mixture also not be? So again, this is mixing apples and oranges. So pharmaceutical grade is a separate definition from the FDA definitions that have been used in this presentation. So if all components that are mixed meet the definition of pharmaceutical grade, they would meet that definition whether in combination or singly. If one mixture is not pharmaceutical grade, then the entire mixture would not be pharmaceutical grade. But the real question, once again here, is do FDA requirements apply? Is this legal extra label use? And once again, I will go back to the FDA speakers for their comments. And if you can also comment about the requirement for supervision for a licensed vet or pharmacist under certain circumstances.
Sure. So in this case, these are all approved products. So that would fit under extra label use compounding, which is those provisions are provided under MDUCA. If any of these were unapproved drugs, and we really, it's whether it's an approved drug, then it fits whether all of them are approved drugs, then it fits under extra label use. If any of them, much like with the pharmaceutical grade, if even one of them is not an approved drug, then that would be compounding a bulk drug substance. So then that would fit under guidance 256 and the circumstances that are outlined there. It's important to remember that Amduca is very specific that compounding needs to occur by a pharmacist or a veterinarian. The language is under the supervision of, so that is expected that the veterinarian is involved, but not that the veterinarian is doing the compounding themselves necessarily. And the same applies to the guidance for compounding from bulk drug substances. A veterinarian or a pharmacist should be giving direction on the compounding and be involved in the decision, but they do not have to actually be doing the compounding themselves.
Thank you. So the next question is sterile dilution of pharmaceutical grade drugs considered compounding? If a pharmaceutical grade diluent, such as sterile saline or PBS, is used to dilute a pharmaceutical grade drug, is it still pharmaceutical grade, or does it need to be scientifically justified and approved by the IACUC? What about drugs that are sold in vials with the diluent attached to lyophilized powder? So again, for our purposes, pharmaceutical grade definitions are different from approved, conditionally approved, or indexed drugs. And all mixed components are, if all mixed components meet the definition of pharmaceutical grade alone or in combination, then they would still be considered pharmaceutical grade by the definition I gave previously. The question again is really legal, extra label, or compounding use if this is considered compounding. And once again, I'll pass this along to my FDA colleagues.
In most cases for sterile dilution to be added to an approved drug, that would be compounding under extra label use. So that is because it's mixing or changing of a product, but that would be legal under Amduca in most cases. In a situation when it's attached to the vial and it's part of the label, that's just legal use of the product. So that's covered by the label. And we would only apply, again, compounding from a bulk drug substance if something was being used with an active ingredient that was not an approved product.
Thank you. So question 5, a PI has received an FDA approval for an investigational new animal drug. The application proposes to administer a dietary supplement that is non-USP grade on study. Does that FDA approval confer some USP grade designation to the supplement for the purposes of administration to the animals, or does the PI still need to justify use of a non-pharmaceutical grade substance? Well, from the OLAW perspective, it sounds like the supplement is the test article under study, and that would be the scientific justification for its use. Regarding the follow-up questions on FDA approval being considered as conditionally approved, I'll leave that to my FDA colleagues.
So being a principal investigator under an INAD does not mean something is conditionally approved. What it means is that you are conducting research that the FDA will review to support an approval or a conditional approval. So you should follow whatever protocol has been provided to you by the drug manufacturer who is seeking the approval or conditional approval, and then just collect all of the data and then understand that that data is going to go to the FDA to be reviewed at some point.
Okay, thank you. So here's another question regarding buprenorphine. What is the status of buprenorphine and other analgesics as to shortages due to FDA enforcement actions? And I'll let my FDA colleagues weigh in.
You want
I
to take
can
this one,
jump
Amber?
in. Sure, I
Okay.
can start. So we have a shortage list of products, and those are drugs that are medically necessary that we are aware of that are in shortage. And buprenorphine is not currently on the list. We do have some information that previously there were some manufacturing issues, and there was a delay in the product going to market, and FDA worked with them to take care of these issues. I think both on the human side and also the index product. I believe Dr. Bailey also assisted with that. So we don't currently have any enforcement action that would be causing any shortages or any knowledge of a current shortage. But we do have a website or a I thought we were going to share it, but we have, oh, there it is. We do have a mailbox. So this is our animal drug shortages mailbox. So if you have any question about if a product is not available, or if a product happens to be in shortage, you can use this mailbox. You can also use it to bring it to our attention so that we can contact the manufacturer and maybe see if there's something that we can help with. And another thing that I'm not sure that I did a good job of highlighting is that one of the reasons that you can compound from a bulk drug substance is if a approved product is not available. So in the guidance, we go through and talk about different reasons that you can use a medical rationale to make a copy, and the inavailability of an approved product would be a reasonable medical rationale for doing a copy of an approved drug.
Thank you. And another availability question. Please comment on buprenorphine SR Ethica availability currently. A statement was made that a pharmaceutical grade sustained release compound is available, but the supply is sufficiently unreliable to be unavailable. Is Zupharm from Wedgwood Pharmaceuticals, a compounding pharmacy, an option? So from the OLA perspective, use of a compounded pharmacy product during periods of unavailability would be considered acceptable, providing that the compounding meets FDA requirements where applicable. And Dr. McQuarrie, Dr. Bailey, do you have anything to add?
I think we would agree with that. As Amber said, if the index or approved drug is not available, then that can be used as a rationale to make a copy. But if there is an indexed or approved drug available that can be used, we would obviously prefer that you use that product that we have reviewed some safety, manufacturing, effectiveness information on. Is there anything else, Amber, there? Okay.
Thank you. Okay, this one is for OLA. Is OLA enforcing the use of Ethica over compounded buprenorphine SR? Is buprenorphine SR through the likes of Zupharm acceptable for research animal use for FDA for OLA? And then as a little bit of added information, Zupharm is a veterinary compounding pharmacy. Is use of Ethica preferred as it is not compounded and developed for mice and rats? So once again, from OLA's perspective, we expect institutions to follow FDA guidelines where applicable. And Dr. McCoy talked a little bit about the hierarchy of how to address drug substances, with the ones having had more evaluation being preferable. And I'd like to pass that over to you for a recap of that.
When you're looking to use something in an extra label manner, certainly we under AMDUCA, you would use the approved product. If you're looking to compound a product and it needs to be mixed or altered in any way, then we really would prefer that the approved product be considered first, because that's gone through that pre-market review. It also has the post-market monitoring that we feel is able to alert us if there is a problem, so that we can make sure that it does not get to too many animals. But we also recognize that it's possible that you may need to use a conditionally approved product, or an index product. So that's kind of the second tier if there's not an approved product available. And then the bulk drug substances would be the next thing that you would look to.
Thank you. And then question 9, the manufacturer of buprenorphine SR has an expiration date of at least 6 months, but also a note to discard 28 days after vial puncture, which takes precedence. OLA and USDA ask institutions to follow manufacturer recommendations to discard after 28 days unless there is an IACUC-approved reason to deviate. There is a 2022 JLAS paper demonstrating extended sterility. What is FDA's take on this? Before I hand it over to Dr. McCoy and Dr. Bailey, I will just say that from the OLA perspective, we concur with USDA, and we also expect that the most stringent requirement is applied. This is important for the maintenance of sterility and efficacy, and one study may not reflect all usage and storage situations across all institutions. So I would be very careful not to extrapolate from one paper to all institutions and all usage scenarios. And now if FDA would like to weigh in.
I would say we concur with OLA's take on this. And in general, we would always recommend following the label instructions regarding expiration dates and when to discard. Yeah.
Thank you. So, question 10, I have heard from a clinician that buprenorphine SR has been reported to be causing abscesses at the injection site. Any reports to FDA on this?
So I am not aware of this, but this information can be obtained through a FOIA request, and that's generally how we release any of our adverse event information.
Thank you. And question 11, we've just received a report that carbon dioxide supplies for euthanasia are currently low. Does FDA have any comment on the availability of medical grade gases? For oxygen, we've been advised in the past that welding grade gases are often superior to medical grade, as impurities would harm the stability of a welded joint, so the quality control is even better.
So we do not have an approved CO2. So we are not aware of any issues with the supply. And so again, with the availability of medical grade gases, that would be something that if we are not aware of any issues with availability, but again, you can utilize that shortage mailbox for more information. And we're also able to work with the other centers to determine if something that is under them is in shortage. And I think that we would always recommend medical grade when you're treating animals over something that's non-medical grade.
Thank you. And I think those were all the questions that we had. So now I will go into the Q&A box. We have one question: is conditionally approved similar to approved for emergency use? For example, when the COVID vaccine was approved for emergency use?
No, that's conditional approval is strictly for animal drugs. And it's an incentive that was provided initially in the Minor Use and Minor Species Animal Health Act of 2004, specifically to promote drug companies to actually get drugs approved for drugs, or for minor species or for minor uses in major species. So it's only in relation to the animal drug approval process. And like I said, all requirements have to be met except for effectiveness. So emergency use would be different. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We are running out of time, so I'm just going to add this one last question and we'll append the rest to the transcript. Is there a definition of small group? And I think this refers to small groups of animals as opposed to like individual prescriptions or bulk office stock.
I think it's important to remember that we're only talking about therapeutic treatments. So this would not, and none of this would apply to investigational treatments. But for small group, it can be defined as needed. So a herd could be a small group, a room could be a small group. So we don't limit it with a definition.
Okay, thank you. We will get the rest of the questions answered and appended to the transcript once we have the materials formatted for accessibility, and there will be a news flash at a listserv announcement making you aware of this. So stay tuned for that in the future. And our next OLAW webinar will be in the winter in December with a topic to be determined, and I hope you all join us at that time. Thank you.